I'm Nicole, 29, and this is the story of how my grandmother Eleanor systematically destroyed my uncle's gold digger wife over the course of 15 years, culminating in a will reading that I will remember for the rest of my life. My grandmother Eleanor was one of those old money Southern women who seemed sweet as pie but had a core of pure steel. She was 87 when she died last year, sharp as a tack until the very end, and the matriarch of our family in every sense of the word. Eleanor had 3 children, my mom Catherine, my uncle Richard, and my aunt Susan. The family had money. Not billionaire money, but the kind of comfortable wealth that comes from generations of good investments, property ownership, and careful management. Eleanor's husband, my grandfather, had died 20 years ago, leaving her with a substantial estate. The family dynamics were pretty normal until 2008, when my uncle Richard, then 52 and recently divorced, met Vanessa at a charity gala. Vanessa was 31, gorgeous, and had clearly identified Richard as her meal ticket. She was sweet and charming at first, but those of us paying attention could see the calculation behind her eyes. She laughed at all Richard's jokes, pretended to be fascinated by his boring corporate law stories, and played the role of devoted younger girlfriend perfectly. Richard fell hard. He was lonely after his divorce, flattered by the attention of a beautiful younger woman, and honestly kind of naive about people's motives. Within 6 months, they were engaged. My grandmother saw through Vanessa immediately. At the engagement party, Grandma pulled me aside, I was 14 at the time, and said, "Watch this one, Nicole. She's already counting my money, and I'm not even dead yet." Grandma tried to talk to Uncle Richard privately, but Vanessa had already started her isolation campaign. She convinced Richard that his family was judgmental and didn't respect their relationship. She cried about how Eleanor hated her and made Richard feel like he had to choose between his new love and his family. Richard chose Vanessa. They got married in a small ceremony that most of the family wasn't invited to. Over the next few years, Vanessa systematically cut Richard off from our family. Family dinners became awkward because Vanessa would either monopolize the conversation or sulk in the corner, claiming people were excluding her. Holiday gatherings turned into negotiations about whether Richard and Vanessa would attend. Eventually, Richard just stopped coming to family events. Vanessa had convinced him that we were toxic and didn't support his happiness. But here's what Vanessa didn't realize. Eleanor wasn't fighting her directly. Eleanor was documenting everything and playing a much longer game. After Richard married Vanessa, the spending began immediately. Vanessa quit her job as a marketing coordinator, we're pretty sure it was a made-up title at a friend's company, and became a full-time housewife. Except instead of managing a household, she managed Richard's credit cards. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, expensive jewelry, a new Mercedes every 2 years. Vanessa lived like she'd won the lottery. Richard was a successful corporate attorney making good money, but even his salary couldn't keep up with Vanessa's spending. That's when Vanessa started looking toward Eleanor's estate. The attempts to get money from Eleanor started subtly. Vanessa would mention to Richard that they needed help with various expenses, home renovations, fake, investment opportunities. Richard would ask Eleanor for loans, which Eleanor would politely decline. Then Vanessa got more aggressive. She started showing up at Eleanor's house uninvited, bringing real estate brochures, and suggesting Eleanor sell her home and move into a more manageable property, with the profit going to help Richard and Vanessa buy their dream house, of course. Eleanor would smile sweetly and say, "That's an interesting suggestion, dear. I'll think about it." Then she'd do nothing. Vanessa tried befriending Eleanor's estate attorney, her financial advisor, even her housekeeper, anyone who might give her information about Eleanor's assets or could influence how she structured her will. What Vanessa didn't know was that Eleanor had hired a private investigator to document everything Vanessa was doing. The PI uncovered some interesting information.
Vanessa had married and divorced twice before Richard, both times to older, wealthy men. She'd received substantial divorce settlements from both previous marriages. She had gambling debts that she was hiding from Richard. She was still in contact with her second ex-husband and possibly having an affair with him. She'd attempted to take out life insurance policies on Richard without his knowledge. Eleanor compiled all of this information, but didn't confront Vanessa or tell Richard. She just waited and documented. Meanwhile, Vanessa's campaign to isolate Richard intensified. She convinced him that his family was trying to manipulate him through Eleanor. She monitored his phone calls and emails. She threw tantrums whenever Richard suggested visiting family. The few times Richard did show up for family events, he looked miserable. He'd aged 20 years in the 5 years since marrying Vanessa. He was stressed, unhappy, and clearly under Vanessa's control. My mom tried to talk to him once, and Richard admitted he was unhappy but felt trapped. If I leave her, she'll take everything in the divorce, and she's threatened to make up abuse allegations. I just have to wait it out. That conversation broke my mom's heart. But when she told Eleanor, my grandmother just patted her hand and said, "Don't worry, dear. Vanessa will get exactly what she deserves." At the time, we thought Eleanor was just being optimistic. We had no idea she was already 3 steps ahead.
Around 2015, Eleanor started making changes to her estate planning. She called family meetings with my mom and aunt, notably excluding Richard, claiming she didn't want to burden him, to discuss her wishes. Eleanor owned her home, a beautiful historic property worth about $2.5 million, a rental property portfolio worth another $3 million, investment accounts totaling around $4 million, various personal property, art, jewelry, etc. Eleanor announced she was updating her will and wanted to be transparent about her intentions. She said she planned to divide everything equally between her 3 children, with specific bequests to grandchildren. "Even Richard?" my Aunt Susan asked. "Even though he's been completely absent?" Eleanor smiled. "Richard is still my son, and I love him. The fact that he's made poor choices in his marriage doesn't change that. He'll inherit his fair share." Then Eleanor did something that seemed strange at the time. She started giving Vanessa exactly what she wanted. Sort of. Eleanor invited Richard and Vanessa to family events and made a big show of welcoming Vanessa warmly. She asked Vanessa's opinion on things, complimented her outfit choices, and acted like they were best friends. Vanessa was thrilled. She thought she'd finally won Eleanor over. Eleanor started having private lunches with Vanessa, just the 2 of them. She'd ask Vanessa's advice about finances, investments, even about updating her will. She made Vanessa feel important and trusted. "I'm so glad Richard found you," Eleanor told Vanessa at one of these lunches. "My mom was secretly present in the restaurant and overheard. You've brought such joy to Richard's life. I want to make sure you're both taken care of after I'm gone." Vanessa practically purred. She started telling friends that she was Eleanor's favorite daughter-in-law. Seeing as she was the only daughter-in-law, this was somewhat true on a technicality. She also went round claiming that she was going to inherit a substantial portion of the estate. During this time, Eleanor had her estate attorney draw up multiple versions of her will. She'd invite Vanessa to her attorney's office for input on charitable donations and family bequests. Vanessa would offer suggestions that always seemed to benefit her and Richard. Eleanor would nod thoughtfully and say, "Those are wonderful ideas, Vanessa. You're so clever." What Vanessa didn't realize was that none of her suggestions were actually being implemented. The attorney was documenting Vanessa's attempts to influence the will, but the actual legal documents being prepared were completely different. Eleanor also started making very public statements about her intentions. At family gatherings that Richard and Vanessa attended, Eleanor would say things like, "I want to make sure my estate is divided fairly among all my children. Richard will inherit his share just like Catherine and Susan." Vanessa would beam. Richard would look uncomfortable but grateful. In 2018, Eleanor was diagnosed with early-stage cancer. It was treatable, but at 84, the prognosis was uncertain. This kicked Vanessa's campaign into overdrive.
Suddenly, Vanessa was the most attentive daughter-in-law imaginable. She visited Eleanor constantly, brought her meals, and offered to take her to medical appointments. She was positioning herself as the devoted family member, the one who truly cared. Eleanor accepted all of this attention graciously. She even changed her emergency contacts to include Vanessa and gave her a key to her house in case of emergencies. My mom was worried. What if Vanessa tries something? What if she influences Mom when she's vulnerable? But Eleanor just smiled. Don't worry, Catherine. Everything is exactly as it should be. None of us understood what she meant until much later.
Eleanor beat cancer, but it took a toll on her health. By 2022, at age 86, she was noticeably frailer. She started using a cane, needed help with some household tasks, and had to slow down significantly. This should have been a time for family to rally around her. Instead, it became Vanessa's full-court press to secure her inheritance. Vanessa convinced Richard that Eleanor needed better care and should sell her house and move into an assisted living facility. The proceeds from selling the house could be invested for her care, with Richard as the financial power of attorney, of course, managed by Vanessa. Eleanor politely declined. "I am perfectly comfortable in my own home with my housekeeper and healthcare aide, but thank you for your concern, dear." Vanessa then suggested that Eleanor should gift money to Richard and her now, rather than waiting until death. For tax purposes, she claimed, it's much more efficient. Eleanor's response: "What an interesting suggestion. Let me discuss that with my financial advisor." She never did, but Vanessa thought she was considering it. Throughout this final year, Eleanor made sure Vanessa remained convinced that she was inheriting big. She'd make comments like, "I'm so glad Richard has you to help him manage the inheritance when I'm gone. It's such a comfort to me." Vanessa started planning her post-Eleanor life openly. She told friends about the beach house in the Carolinas she was going to buy with her inheritance. She started looking at luxury cars. She even hired an interior designer to plan renovations to their current house, telling them money would be no object after Eleanor passed. In private, Vanessa became more demanding. She pushed Richard to ask Eleanor for money constantly. When Eleanor refused, Vanessa would rage at Richard, calling him weak and pathetic for not standing up to his mother. Richard was exhausted and miserable. He confided in my mom during one of his rare visits that he wanted to leave Vanessa, but felt trapped. "Just hold on a little longer, Richard," Eleanor told Richard during a rare private conversation. "I promise you, things will get better. Trust me." Richard didn't understand, but he trusted his mother. Eleanor sadly died in October 2023, peacefully in her sleep at age 87. The whole family was devastated, except for Vanessa, who was already mentally spending her inheritance. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Eleanor's attorney invited all the beneficiaries to his office for the formal reading. We all showed up: my mom Catherine, my aunt Susan, my uncle Richard, Vanessa, who insisted on attending as Richard's spouse, and all the grandchildren, including me. Vanessa wore black designer clothes and expensive jewelry, mourning attire that probably cost $5,000. She looked somber but couldn't quite hide the anticipation in her eyes. What happened in that conference room over the next hour was the most savage, perfectly executed revenge I have ever witnessed.
Eleanor's attorney, Mr. Harrison, was an older gentleman who'd known our family for 40 years. He opened the will with the standard legal language, then got to the specific bequests. "To my daughter Catherine, I leave my home and all its contents to maintain or sell as she sees fit." My mom teared up. She'd grown up in that house and loved it. "To my daughter Susan, I leave my rental property portfolio to be managed or liquidated according to her judgment." Aunt Susan nodded, grateful. Then came Richard's portion. "To my son Richard, I leave my investment accounts and financial assets totaling approximately $4 million to be transferred to him directly.
Richard looked stunned. Vanessa squeezed his hand, mentally calculating her share of $4 million. But Mr. Harrison wasn't done. However, this bequest comes with specific conditions outlined in detail in the full will. Richard, you'll receive your inheritance in a trust structure that will be explained momentarily. Then, Mr. Harrison pulled out a separate document. Eleanor also left a personal letter to be read aloud to all beneficiaries. She specifically requested this letter be read before the trust conditions are explained. He opened the letter and began reading in Eleanor's voice, or as close as he could get. My dearest family, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I hope you're celebrating my life rather than mourning too deeply. I've lived a long and fulfilling life without any regrets. But before we get to the technical details of my estate, I need to address something that has weighed on my heart for the past 15 years, Vanessa. Vanessa, dear, if you're present for this reading, and I expect you are, I want you to know that I saw you from the very first day. I saw the wickedness in your eyes, the way you assessed my son as a target rather than a person. I watched you isolate him from his family, spend his money recklessly, and wait impatiently for my death so you could inherit wealth you've done nothing to earn. For 15 years, I watched you manipulate my son, and I collected evidence of every scheme, every lie, every affair, every attempt to influence my estate planning. I hired investigators. I documented everything. I have proof of your 3 previous marriages, your gambling debts, your ongoing affair with your second ex-husband, and your attempts to take out life insurance on my son. I played along, Vanessa. I let you think you'd won me over. I let you believe you were inheriting a fortune, and you fell for it completely. Because narcissists like you always underestimate the intelligence of people they view as obstacles. Now, let's talk about Richard's inheritance. At this point, Vanessa's face had gone from anticipatory to pale to bright red. Richard was staring at Mr. Harrison with his mouth open.
Mr. Harrison continued reading. Richard will inherit $4 million as stated. However, this money is structured in an irrevocable trust with very specific conditions. The trust will be managed by my daughter Catherine as trustee. Richard will receive distributions for reasonable living expenses, health care, and other necessities. No funds from this trust can be used to pay for luxury items, gambling debts, or expenses incurred by or for Vanessa. If Richard divorces Vanessa within 1 year of my death, the trust will dissolve and he will receive the full $4 million outright. If Richard remains married to Vanessa for more than 1 year after my death, the $4 million will be donated to charity and Richard will receive nothing. Richard, my dear son, I'm giving you a choice. You can keep a woman who has made you miserable for 15 years and lose your inheritance entirely. Or you can free yourself and claim the financial security you deserve. I'm not trying to control you from beyond the grave. I'm giving you the push you've needed all along and the financial means to escape. As for Vanessa, you will receive nothing from my estate, not 1 penny. And I've made sure that the evidence I collected about your activities will be provided to Richard's divorce attorney should he choose to pursue that path. You've spent 15 years waiting for me to die so you could spend my money. Instead, I've spent 15 years documenting your gold-digging behavior so my son could finally be free of you. I hope it was worth it, dear. With love to my family, the real ones, Eleanor. The conference room was dead silent, except for Vanessa's heavy breathing. Her face had gone from red to purple, and her hands were shaking. "This is bullshit!" Vanessa finally screamed. "You can't do this! This is manipulation! It's not legal!"
Mr. Harrison looked at her calmly. "Mrs. Hartwell, I assure you this will is completely legal. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell was of sound mind and body when she executed these documents. She had the right to structure her estate however she wished and to place conditions on bequests." Vanessa turned to Richard. "You're not going to let this happen, are you? We'll fight this. We'll sue." Richard was staring at the table, and I could see something shifting in his expression. It was like watching someone wake up after being in a fog for years. "Richard!" Vanessa shrieked. "Say something!" Richard looked up at her, and for the first time in 15 years, I saw my actual uncle in his eyes, instead of the beaten-down man Vanessa had created. "No," he said quietly. "No what?" "I'm not fighting this. I'm not suing, and I'm not staying married to you." Vanessa looked like she'd been slapped. "You can't be serious. You're going to throw away our marriage for money?" Richard laughed, actually laughed, something I hadn't heard him do since before he met Vanessa. "You married me for money, Vanessa. I'm just finally acknowledging the transactional nature of our relationship. The only difference is my mother made sure you'd end up with nothing while giving me a way out." "I love you," Vanessa cried, but it rang hollow even to her. "No, you don't. You love what you thought you could get from my family. But my mother was smarter than both of us. She saw through you from day one, and she spent 15 years preparing for this exact moment." Richard stood up and looked at Mr. Harrison. "What do I need to do to file for divorce?" Mr. Harrison pulled out another envelope. "Your mother anticipated you might ask that. Here's a referral to an excellent family law attorney and a retainer check to get you started. She also compiled all the evidence about Vanessa's affairs and financial behavior for use in divorce proceedings." Vanessa tried one last manipulation. "Richard, please, think about what you're doing. We can work through this. I'll change. I'll be better. Don't let your dead mother control you like this." Richard looked at her with something close to pity. "My mother isn't controlling me, Vanessa. She's freeing me. There's a difference." He walked out of the conference room, and for the first time in 15 years, he went straight to my mom's house for family dinner. Vanessa tried to follow him, screaming threats about the divorce, about taking half of everything, about making his life hell. Mr. Harrison calmly handed her an envelope. "This contains documentation of your affairs, your hidden gambling debts, your previous marriages and divorce settlements, and your attempts to defraud Richard and influence Mrs. Hartwell's estate planning. I suggest you speak to an attorney before making any more threats." Vanessa grabbed the envelope and stormed out. Richard filed for divorce the next week. With the evidence Eleanor had compiled, Vanessa had no leverage. The divorce was finalized in 6 months. Vanessa got nothing. Richard received his full $4 million inheritance. He retired early from his high-stress law firm job, traveled extensively, and eventually started dating a woman his own age who actually likes him for who he is. Vanessa tried to run the same gold-digger playbook on another wealthy man, but found that Eleanor had quietly warned several people in their social circles. She ended up moving to Florida, where apparently she married and divorced again within 2 years. The rest of us inherited our shares, and my mom still lives in Eleanor's house, which she's preserved as a family gathering place. But the best part? Eleanor had one more trick up her sleeve that we didn't discover until months later. Remember how Eleanor gave Vanessa a key to her house for emergencies and made her an emergency contact? Vanessa thought this meant Eleanor trusted her. Actually, Eleanor had installed hidden cameras throughout her house that were activated whenever someone entered using Vanessa's key. Those cameras caught Vanessa going through Eleanor's personal items, trying to access financial documents, and even attempting to steal jewelry on several occasions. Eleanor compiled this footage but never used it while she was alive. Instead, she left instructions for it to be handed over to police if Vanessa tried to contest the will or make any legal trouble for Richard. Vanessa never contested anything. She knew she'd been beaten.